Thank you for having me. A little bit of an introduction. As Dan said, I've been consulting with associations for over 25 years. And I've lost track, it's over 1,000. So everybody always wants to know what the most unique association I've ever worked with. And so I'm going to preempt the question and tell you that about 15 years ago I worked for the International Institute for Multiple Personalities. How many members do you have? The best was in there in the board meeting and somebody says, "Do we have a quorum?" Anyway, I work with all different kinds of associations, professional societies, trade associations. It runs the gamut. And that work over those 25 years is the basis for the book. And those of you who have read it understand that it's fundamentally saying that we have to rethink the way we govern and manage associations in today's environment. And so I'm going to go through the concepts and the base. The book is broken down into here's why we have to make some changes in the way we think and manage. Here are the changes that Mary and I think can help correct our situation. And finally, some hows. Here are ways that you can start to move towards making some of these changes in your organizations. Before I go any further, there are a couple points. One is that associations, while they're all the same, they're all different. Just in this room, just the little knowledge I have about the state associations and NSPE is that, first of all, your states differ in size and scope and their staffing and all the rest. And so even though we've got all associations in here serving the same type of member, we're all very, very different. So it's very difficult to prescribe, one solution for a lot of different organizations, but I think you'll find that in the main, some of these recommendations or changes that we propose fit. The first thing that's important when you look at why we have to change the traditional model of associations is that we've got a new normal. You've heard this term, new normal. They talk about, okay, when we come out of the Great Recession, what will the new normal be? And somebody was asking me about this, and I said, the associations have a new normal. We've got it right now. And this new normal has been shaped by those 6 trends. And it's the confluence of these 6 which have irreversibly changed our environment. And associations have simply not aligned themselves. I ran into an exec out in Denver who happens to be an archaeologist, and he said, when you look at the decline of civilizations, there are some very, very striking similarities between what you talk about in your book and what we have learned about the demise of civilizations. And so actually we're working on an article to talk about this, because one of the things that it says is that it wasn't one issue or situation that led to the demise of any of the great civilizations. It wasn't like a plague, or it wasn't one weather catastrophe or anything. When they look at all of them, it was a confluence of 3, 4, 5 different things that kind of added up to a situation that the civilization failed to adjust to. And so that's what we have in associations. We've got a new landscape. I'm just going to touch on these real quickly. But the first one is one that I think people had not, the technology, when everybody gets that. You can't avoid it today. But the time issue is probably every bit as high impact as that technology piece. And what the whole point of the book is to show that what we have right now is it's not a bad model. The traditional association model, the way we govern, it's not a bad model. It's just a misfit. It's a mismatch with our environment today. And so right off the bat, we have a time-intensive model. Time to go to meetings, time to read the publications, time to get your continuing education, time to get involved in community activities, time to get involved in government affairs. Time. What's everybody working on? Time. Time is scarcer than it ever is. I mean, we got the same amount of time we had 500 years ago. There's 24 hours in a day. The issue is the complexity of life. And this book's actually gotten some play internationally, and I asked the question, are the time pressures the same in the Netherlands? And they said, oh yeah, that's all the same thing here. So it's not a U.S. phenomenon. But that time issue is huge. Just trying to get the associations, the members' attention, to get the association on the radar scope of a member is a significant challenge in today's environment. The value in the ROI proposition, some of you have been in associations for quite a while, and you will remember the day when people just joined. They just thought it was the thing to do. It was part of being a professional engineer. You belonged to NSPE, you supported your state organization. And a lot of associations survived in that environment, but it's gone. It's over. And they want to know what they get for their dues dollar. And it's no longer a professional obligation or the thing to do. It's a transaction. I give you dues dollars, I expect to get something in return. But again, we went on for years, and the model was really designed around one where people didn't ask many questions. I remember doing focus groups in 1985 in the Carolinas with general contractors, and it's, why do you belong to AGC of Carolina? And they give me this blank stare. They didn't know why. So I'm second generation, and my dad belonged, and now we belong. We've always belonged. Support the industry. Not there anymore. The diversity, I was looking at some of the findings of Dan's surveys, and one of the things they talk about is the increasing specialization within the profession. And this has happened in all the professions, medicine, nursing, and all the rest. And those two, combination of 2 and 3, where you have increased specialization and higher expectations within each one, creates a very challenging environment. Just to go back to number 2, the poster child of the I don't belong just because it's part of being the profession is the American Medical Association. AMA's market share in 1965, they had 75% of all physicians belong to the AMA. That number now is 19% and continues to drop. The Nurses Association, ANA, in the 50s, they had 50% of all nurses as members of ANA. Today, that number is 3.7%. What happened? They specialized. So the nurses gravitated to their specialty organizations, the physicians gravitated to they went to where the value was. And so it's not that physicians don't belong, they belong to the American Academy of Family Physicians, the American Society of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgeons, the College of American Pathology, the minimally invasive cardiac surgeons. I mean, it's been very good for me because it created a market of associations, hundreds of them. The generational values, if we don't have a generational disconnect, I'll eat my hat. And there are some people that argue that we don't. But if we don't have one, I've got every client that I've worked with in the last 5 to 10 years has been concerned about this. They're worrying needlessly. But you can't convince me that it's not the case. There's actually research that will support this. ASAE surveyed a large population, general population, and they said, what's the value of an association? And when they broke it down by demographic, the 60 plus had the highest value of an association, and it went down with the baby boomers, and down with X, and down again with Y. So it just showed that with each succeeding generation, our model, our appeal, our value is diminished. This competition thing is, any good author has to write another book, so we're writing another book. But its focus, or a lot of its focus, is really starting to pan out to talk about the competitive environment we're in. I mean, we got competition coming out our ears, and we are not designed to be competitive organizations, if you really look at us. And I mean, it's competition from other associations, civil engineers, mechanical engineers, all different types of subspecialties. So we got association competition. We've got for-profit competition. We've got competition from your members themselves, because they're providing continuing education and using content marketing to position firms and companies. It's all competition for education and information dollars. We're competing with the internet. That's a big competitor. We're competing with social media for the networking space. And so we are just in an environment of unprecedented competition, and we don't act like it. I sound like I'm being a little critical, but I mean, I'm going, you know, people do, you ask them, oh, we don't have any competition. We don't have any competition? Are you kidding me? I mean, how many people go to Google today that used to call the society to get some information? You don't need it anymore. Information coming out of the woodwork. How about continuing education? How many sources for continuing education do you have? You know, people's eyes roll over when I ask that question. They say, you can't even list it all, Harrison. It's just everywhere. So, bless you. Finally, the technology piece. There's no question in my mind that the way we deliver value is increasingly becoming internet or digitally based. And all you have to do is follow the trends and the numbers. I'm not a technological expert, but I watch the numbers. And, you know, you got Facebook that's up and is approaching 1 billion members. How many YouTube downloads do you think there are a day? 4 billion. 4 billion. I know a lot of it's cats playing pianos and stuff like that, but still, 4 billion downloads. And the other piece, two other pieces, the shift from print to digital is happening faster than anybody thought it would. The books, I mean, you got newspapers quitting publishing. New Orleans, just a paper down there announced they're only going to publish 3 days a week. The Detroit Free Press is only publishing 2 or 3 days a week. And so that shift, the percentage of books, I think it's up to 20 or 30% of all books are being sold electronically. So we have to stay on pace with that. Finally, the other thing that just caught my attention is the incredible acceleration of TV streaming, movie and TV streaming. I just saw data the other day that said 1/3 of all households have streamed a television show or a movie in the last 30 days. So once they start streaming, you know, think of how they're consuming their information, how they're consuming their entertainment, and so this is the way they're going to expect to consume their education, their information, and all the rest. So those are the trends. That's what we have to react to. That's the environment we have to deal with. And you know, so this kind of shows the mismatch. This wasn't in the book. It kind of occurred to me over time, but you know, our model is time intensive, and our environment's got time pressures. We are slow and tradition bound, and we are living in an environment of accelerating change. I can't remember who told me this, but you know, talk about associations being slow. He said, you know, speed kills. Be an association and live forever. Designed for a homogeneous member, we've got specialization and consolidation in the marketplaces. So the design is for a membership that all looks alike. I use the example of CPAs. If you go back 25 or 30 years ago, you could have lined up every CPA in the United States and shot them with one bullet. They were all the same. They all did tax and audit work, and they worked in public firms, period. Now, today, less than 50% of CPAs do tax and audit work and work in a public firm. We're face-to-face and print-centric. The world's going digital on us. And we've got this mindset that, or our model, it's not really a mindset, it is mindset. We've got a model that says, here's a package of services for one dues amount, and we've got a society that wants it what they want and when they want it and how they want it. The equivalent here is the record album versus single. And we're trying to sell a record album. So you get all the songs, and the buyer's saying, we want singles, we don't want the album. Listen, as we're going through this, if you've got a comment, a question, or a violent disagreement, I'll take them. Any comments so far? So far, everybody agrees with this so far. There's no question. This is, no matter what kind of association you are, this is your environment. Nobody can argue with this. Now, you can argue with my recommendations, which we'll go to that and have at it. The 5-member competency-based board, I'll confess right now, was meant to be provocative. There. I can tell you that in the first draft, I think it was a 9-member board. I think it went to 7 on a subsequent draft, and then when we came to the final manuscript, I told Mary, I said, come on, let's go for 5. The real point is, is our governance an asset or is it a liability? That's the real point. And in too many associations, our governance is a liability versus being an asset. And when we look at why they're not an asset, a lot of times it's the way they are composed. And so we look at boards and say, you know, are these boards really composed for performance? And when you look at it, they're composed for everything but performance. It's where you're from, or what special interest you represent, or who you know, or how long you've been hanging around. And that's who ends up on our boards. And it's interesting, I'm working on my newsletter, and somebody sent me an article that talked about, there have been 3 or 4 high-profile terminations of university presidents. And they said, you know, when you look at this, they started to ask questions about the boards. I think Virginia was one, and Florida may have been another. But they said, you look at these boards of the university systems, and you know how they got there? They contributed to the governor's campaign fund. So what are they may not have even gone to a university. Okay, but now they're governing a university. They said, maybe we really ought to take a look at who gets on these boards in terms of how they're directing and controlling our university systems. But anyway, 5-member competence-based board, let's go into it. This may differ from organization to organization, but I really think that the sooner you get your governance in line, the better off you are. There are people that disagree. They say that, you know, that's going to be a diversion. We got work to do. But you got to make that call. Here gets to the point in terms of how we compose boards. And all we're saying is, can we think about what we're looking for, what capabilities, what competencies, what skills, what relationships we need on this board? And people say, well, how do you do that? I said, well, I'd ask myself 2 questions. I'm working with an organization on this right now. What's the biggest opportunity for the association in the next 3 to 5 years? Okay, they say X, Y, Z. 2, what's the biggest challenge that we're going to be confronted with? And they'll say, okay, A, B, C. All right. Now, given that's our biggest opportunity, biggest challenge, and we're talking about high level, 3 to 5 year in scope, who can we attract to the board that can help us, help direct and control the organization to either take advantage of that opportunity or deal with that challenge? And so that if we know that we are going to be, let's say that we really haven't been in the government affairs arena, but we are getting dragged into it because of legislation and regulation, we better get people on our board who understand the political process and the legislative process. Or if we need fundraising, people, I always love fundraising groups, and I ask the board, who wants to fundraise? Nobody raises their hand. I said, what's wrong with this picture? Okay? If we need fundraising, we need people who are willing to raise funds. I mean, the philanthropic and charitable groups have a little phrase for it. You know, it's give, get, or get out. And that's the way they look at their board. You either give money, you get it, or we don't need you on the board. Now, that's a competency-based board. They know what they want on that board. They're just not taking people because where they live or who they know or the rest. And so I just think we need a more careful thought process, vet our boards a little more intelligently, identify what we're looking for. The interesting thing about this, when people say, well, how'd you come up with the 5-member board? I've got this little house in Florida, and it only has room for a dining room table that'll seat 6 people. And so we always just have 2 other couples over, so there's 6 of us. But over a year or so, I noticed that when you have 6 people, guess what? You have one conversation. There's just one conversation at that table. What happens when you go to a table of 8? It splits. So my scientific basis for the 5-member board is my dining room table in Florida. Lori wanted to buy a new table. I said, no way. We're stuck with that. The other point is that it just acknowledges the status quo. How many of our organizations are really governed by the executive committee or the officers anyway? They were saying it. I didn't even start it at lunch today. They talked about it. They said, really, how many people really do, govern the organization in spite of a House of Delegates and a board and all the rest? And so we've been governing our organizations with 5-member boards, if you will, for a long time anyway. Comments, questions, violent disagreements? Good.
The one thing that I really liked about your progression from 9 to 75 is it was always a odd number. I've actually done committees or boards that have an even number, and you could not get a vote to pass.
Well, you know, the fact of the matter, when you look at it, if it's a 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 or whatever, you know, you don't have a real strong consensus anyway. But sometimes you got to make decisions and you got to get off the dime. Maybe you got the Supreme Court that figures that out. It's always interesting. How many are on the Supreme Court? And how many are in Congress? Why is that? I mean, people say, well, Harrison, that's kind of un-American to not have, you know, geographic representation. I said, how's it working for you right now? Well, anything else? Come on, there's got to be pushback. Somebody always gets on me on this one. I'm used to it. I've been making these presentations for a year and a half. There's nothing I haven't been shot at. Yeah, I think I would agree with that. For example, we use the term competency, but sometimes I think capabilities or qualifications, just some way of vetting. I think one group's calling it qualifications and skills. I mean, relationships would not really be a competency, but we might be knowing that we're going to have to be working with other sister organizations very closely. So we need people who've got connections, who know people that are respected. So that's not really a competency, but that's something we need on the board. So I accept that. George? Yeah, I mean, you know, 9. But it's just that people argue, oh, does board size not make a difference? I said, of course it makes. I had one guy say, you know, I don't think board size makes a difference. And then in his next breath he says, but these boards of 300 are ridiculous. I said, so size does make a difference. We're just arguing over, you know, 300 versus 30 or whatever. I just think, and again, I've been working with a client on this because we're trying to identify, would it be more responsive? Would a smaller group be more creative? Would it be more responsive? Would it engage its board members better? Would it make better use of the human capital of that board? Would it be able to attract better board members? And I think you think your answer to a lot of those would be yes. I mean, what would you rather serve on, a board of 35 or one of 5? Yeah, well, I'll make a bet on the 35 versus the 5. Well, I don't think you're going to do that, but you could try. He said if you went from a board of 200 to 5. A lot of, I can't remember the numbers. There's data on how many are compensated, but I think most are not. Although a lot of corporate boards get pretty good compensation. But some people say, well, would you have to compensate a 5-member board? I don't know, maybe not. The real cost of compensation is just, you know, I've seen some groups put together. I had a group, a 50-member board of an organization meeting, I think 3 times a year. I said 2 at lunch. I think it was 3. And they started adding it up. Not just the direct cost, but how much staff time was meant to prepare for it and everything else. $1.6 million for that board. And their dues were $6 million. I said, how'd you like to go to your members and say, of the $6 million, we're blowing 1.6 on governance. I had a House of Delegates out in California, similar number, about $1.5 million for a House of Delegates meeting. And so as people start looking at the data and they go, are we getting $1.6 million out of this? Is this the best we can get out of that kind of, and you really have to add it all up. You got to say, it's how much staff time, allocate that time to it, and all the rest. Yep.
Can you suggest 5 competencies that you need on board?
Right off. Mine, 1, you know, I work with groups, and there's always a guy or a gal that has a real good sense of the profession or the industry. For some reason, they get it. Sometimes they make a hobby out of it. They know what's going on. They know what the trends are. A lot of people are kind of siloed down into their work, but some of them. So I want somebody that's kind of a visionary in the industry, that's got a long line of sight, that's looking down the road. I've got a client today that's making me interview people, and they're asking some really tough questions about the high impact trends and developments they see. And it's very interesting to listen to some of them, and you go, boy, this guy is on this game, and others, they don't see it. So that's one thing. Number two, I got to have somebody that understands at some level technology. I got to have a board member. Not that I don't want a propeller head. I don't want a guy that is going to figure out exactly what software is. I just need somebody that understands the scale and scope of what's going on in the whole area of internet technology. So those would be two off the bat. You know, the interesting thing was one we always go after is a finance person. If you think about it, you're always making sure you got somebody who can watch the numbers for you. As a matter of fact, a lot of times your treasurer, you'll ignore the bylaws and let them serve for a couple of years because they're good, and you need somebody that can understand how that works. But you need the finance person. And I don't know, those are three off the top of my head. Again, it's really a match with what your challenge or your opportunities are, and that's where you want to match up. Yep.
In this teardown process, how do you get over the laws of members that they are not represented? Right now, we have representation by geography and other things, so that feel like that everyone is represented. But you pare this down, how do you avoid that?
I think you have to be sensitive to it, number one. Okay, so you can't ignore it. You just can't brush it off and say, well, it's not an issue. The thing that I see in organizations is that there are a handful of people from that segment or that interest group or whatever that will rattle that part of the cage. But if you go out into the hinterlands and ask them, do you feel like your district representative is, and they go, who's your district representative? They can't name them. They don't know who they are. So I think we had to do a little reality testing on just how important that is. And I think you could make some cases, for example, we got to take somebody I'm from Missouri, so I'm going to say, who's from Missouri? I grew up there, by the way, St. Louis and Kansas City. I go, we got to take somebody from Kansas City. Well, they send Coerver. They've been sending Coerver for 30 years. He's the only guy in Missouri and he doesn't say a word in the board meetings. He just likes to go and go to the resorts and enjoy himself and go to the receptions. He's not really, he's not representing Missouri's interest at all. So I think there's some flaws to that. And again, usually it's a couple of people that will agitate on that. So, well, we have to have this represented. We have to have this represented. I mean, I think if you asked an intelligent question, you say, what would you rather have? A board that's got to plug somebody in for one of those slots, or a board that's structured to really lead and govern the organization in an intelligent way? Yeah.
What about title on the board? You want a board that has some maturity. We talk about the secretary or the treasurer, and that's certainly how it stands with you. Do you want more mature or do you want more tenure?
I think you got to strike a balance. You need continuity. You can't. Some of these groups have got no continuity. I've got one client. I mean, they kind of reconstitute their executive committee every year. It's driving me nuts. And so you got to strike a balance. And I ought to sit down and come up with some better answer. But I think you want some continuity. I think 3, 4, 5 years of service, so you get that out of it. But you also need to bring in new blood. I can tell you one thing we need on our boards right now is youth. And I mean, we need it fast. And we don't need one token young engineer. If my board would be a bunch of 30-year-olds. You know why? Because I was thinking about this. Everybody's thinking, and I don't think we're going to wake up in the middle of the night and say, hot dog, I figured it out. I know how to connect with the next generation. I think we've got to disabuse ourselves of that. We're not going to have some kind of epiphany and say, whoa, we know how to connect. But if we bring them in and put them in positions of authority, they'll come up with the model. I really believe that. Because I don't think we're going to fix it with a token young professional on our board. And I think that if that would be one thing that I would do if I had my choices. I need some youth on there fast. And I'm not even so sure that'll work. Yeah.
When I look at your original list of conflicts, it's a broad generalization, but it strikes me a little bit that associations who know what members used to need, but have no clue what members of the future need. And it feels a little bit like trying to, the chicken before the egg thing. If you're trying to figure out competencies for a board to lead an organization that really doesn't have a clue what the future membership needs, that you're kind of in a conundrum there, because is it worthwhile to try to find competencies when you don't know what you need those competencies to serve?
The one thing I would say to your question, and it got me thinking, is that I'm not so sure that what our members want or need is fundamentally different than what it was. I think the problem is there are a lot more people out there delivering those things than ever before. They want to know what's going on. Some of them like to interact and network. Some of them feel it's important to be represented. You know, the basics. I think how we do that and how we deliver that and how we understand that it's a very competitive environment for most of that, with the exception of advocacy, that's the challenge. I don't think it's the fact that we don't know what they want. It's the fact that we don't know how they want it. Okay, networking. I mean, you do it at a bar during the session. Now you do it this way. I've always said, you know, where is this thing going? Has anybody read the book Super Sad True Love Story? Am I the only guy? What it has, this is a futuristic thing, and everybody has these things they call them apparati, and they hang around their necks. And this is basically an iPhone on steroids. For example, you go into a bar, and immediately everybody rates you. Okay, there are 50 guys in there, and you're rated like 25. There's one guy, he's always like number 37. He's always number 50. He's always the ugliest guy in the bar. He says one time a guy came in, and I went up to 49, but as soon as the guy read his apparati, he left because he knew he was 50. But anyway, so I digress. Anyway, I just think that's the issue. It's not that they want things, it's how they want it, and the fact that the number of people out there that are delivering those things, that are making those things available, then it comes back to the competitive environment. I think we underestimate the level of competition we've got. The staff issue, let me move on ahead because I want to make sure we cover the waterfront. Yeah.
One quick question.
Sure.
The difference about governance is you have the executive committee, which acts as the board of directors in your recommendation in your book, I believe, which is a smaller number. Can you comment on that?
Ask the question again.
You always talk about the board, but you have an executive committee at NSPE, which is a smaller number, that acts similar to what you recommend in your board.
So what do we need the other guys for?
Good question.
No, that's what I mean. We don't need them. You guys understand lean approaches. Anything that doesn't add value is waste. And so at some point in time, if there's a point in time with a group, whatever the number is, where an additional board member doesn't add value and therefore it's waste. And so my question is, if the executive committee is capable of directing and controlling the organization, that's what governance is, direct and control, legal definition, then what do we have the other ones there to watch them? Staff, we just have to get more out of our staff. Now, I know some of your states don't have staff, and some have part-time staff and all the rest. But the fact of the matter is, when we do have staff, we got to make sure we optimize that resource. And too often, I think we sub-optimize. I said underutilized. Somebody corrected me. He said, Harrison, we're utilized. We're just not optimized. I said, good point. And it's not, this is not about a control thing. It's not like a staff-driven versus a volunteer-driven. You know, the board governs the organization. The board's in control, period. There's no question about that. It's a question of optimizing our human capital. And In a lot of associations, we waste a lot of human capital. I asked groups, I said, okay, you got a board meeting, and if somehow you could take the knowledge and experience and the expertise of that members of your board and somehow weigh it on a scale and say, I got X pounds of knowledge and expertise, what percent did you tap at that board meeting? And they'll say 5%. Well, that's sub-optimization of human capital. We're leaving way too much on the table. We're not getting the best out of it. We're not maximizing it. And so we've got to understand that limitations of volunteers being time-pressed, in some instances out of their depth in terms of governing the organization. Some of these organizations are pretty sophisticated. I know we got a mixed bag in here, but we just have to recognize the potential of our CEOs, and they're going to be a critical component of operating in a competitive environment going forward. The member market. I know a little bit about your market. I'm certainly not an expert on it. But I know that markets are dynamic. They change. Professions specialize. Industries consolidate. And so my point in the book here, and it may or may not apply to NSPE, or your state associations, gets to the question of, have we still got a fix on a market? You know, do we really understand our market? Do we know who we're serving? And in some instances, and number two is kind of wisecrack, but it's really true. There are associations where the market has just moved away. I mean, and they're still trying to serve a market that doesn't exist anymore. And so we just have to make sure that, I use the term serviceable market, that we have defined a market that we can serve. Remember that associations are really designed to serve an homogeneous market. Well, if our market has become unhomogeneous, then how do we sort through that and decide where we're going to focus our efforts and where we can perform? And I think in some instances, I don't know if it's the case here, but I think that sometimes we would be better off trying to serve a smaller market. A lot of associations are always trying to expand the scope of their market. Oh, let's try to reach out to this adjacent group, or there's a related segment that's kind of like ours, and could we reach out? And generally those attempts are not very successful. So we just got to stay on top of our member markets. I could give you a couple of examples. Everybody knows what automobiles are. Automobile dealers, there used to be 30,000 of them in the United States. They're down to about 18,000. But, 25, 30 years ago, almost all of them were single dealer-owned, one dealership thing. Well, now you got AutoNation owns 300, 400, 500 dealerships. You've got mega dealers that own 25, 30. And so they don't need a lot of the things that the association did for the one single point shop. And so now we really have two different markets. We've got the solo single dealership, and we got the big guys, and what they want is totally different. Even down to, if you understand franchise law, I mean, the big guys want a weak franchise law because they want to be able to absorb their competition. The little guys want a strong franchise law to keep the big guys from eating them alive. So they get split over a key piece of legislation that's critically important to that industry. So you got to say to yourself, who are we going to serve here? Can we serve both of these masters? And in many cases, I think associations are struggling with that. You know more about your market than I do. This one, becoming more and more convinced that if we do not get better focus in terms of our programs and services, it's a competitive disadvantage. It's a huge competitive disadvantage. If you're trying to run 4 or 5 different businesses and your competition's only running one, how do you feel about your odds? And so we've just got to understand that look at the department stores, the demise of the department stores because of the competition from specialty stores. Where are you going to go buy housewares? Williams, Sonoma, Crate and Barrel, those specialists, that have great assortments, or are you going to go to a department store and take your chances? So we've got to understand that, first of all, volume, the number of our services, does not equal value. Somebody told me that somebody at NSPE had done an assessment of how many programs and services and activities. How many? How many? 477 things. Okay? Now, I don't want to offend anybody, but I got to ask you a question. How many members do you think could have any conception of 100 of those? That's a record for me. I had this one group out in Denver that said, these are the 150 things we do for our members. And I'm going, 150 things for your members? I'm going, how many members do you think read the list of 150? How many do you think got through 75? I mean, how many businesses can an association be in? 470? One of the problems is, well, our members don't know what we do. Well, when you're doing 470, I got to tell you, that's a problem. Okay, there's going to be a test at the end of this session. We're going to ask you to write down the 470 things that NSPE does. So I think we agree that there are downsides of diversification. The first is the clutter. I mean, there's enough clutter out there. We don't need to create it for ourselves. And so the communication problems of communicating 470 things, the competitive disadvantage because it disperses our resources across all, and we marginalize our efforts in all of them instead of concentrating them on a select few where we can excel and be competitive. The complexity that it requires in terms of organization and responsibility for managing all that. So we have to understand that maybe in the old days that was a good model, but today it's not a competitive model, and it's not a model that adds value. And one of the chapters in the next book is we've got to, and Peter Drucker has been talking about this forever, it's nothing new. We've got to have a systematic abandonment of programs and services that have outlived their usefulness, they're not competitive, that were great ideas that didn't pan out, that's utilization has dropped, for whatever reason, no longer deserve to be on the menu. And we've got to recognize the power of a narrow product line in terms of being competitive, being easy to communicate, and being easier to manage. Let me give you, I got two examples of how people narrowed their product line. I don't have a slide for the first one. Have you read the book? I'll try again on this book. I'll get some pickup on this one. Have you read the Steve Jobs biography? A couple of you. Read that book. First of all, it's a very well-written book. Number two, it's kind of interesting because you get a little history of the technology. Like in 1985, his engineers just figure out how to draw a square on the computer, and they're all excited. I'm going, drawing a square? Was that big of a deal? And three, you find out what a nutcase Steve Jobs was. Anyway, and I mean, he is a nutcase squared. He left Apple, or he was ousted from Apple. I can't remember the exact years, but he had a hiatus of about 12 years when he worked for Next and Pixar. In that 12 years, Scully was the first one that replaced him. I can't remember who the ex guy was, but they went through a product proliferation period that was unbelievable. They said at every board meeting they were adding new products. They were making servers, they were making printers, they were just going. Jobs came in, and in 1 year after returning, eliminated 70% of the product line. And Apple went from losing $1 billion to making money in less than a year by narrowing the product line. Let me give you another example. Is Ford in better shape than it was 3 years ago? Yes. GM in better shape? Ford got rid of Volvo, Jaguar, Mercury, Land Rover, and Aston Martin. Why? Focus. We are going to focus on Ford and Lincoln, period. And that is what has been a major contributor to their success. GM got rid of Saab, Oldsmobile, Pontiac, Saturn, and Hummer to focus totally on Chevrolet and Cadillac. Hey, you know why Buick? They sell like 5 times as many Buicks in China as they do in the United States. So Buick made the cut because the Chinese like them. Think about what it meant for those guys to eliminate those name brands. Do you know how many billions of dollars they had invested in those names over the decades?
Did they eliminate them, or did they find some dummy to survive?
Oh, they got some of them to buy them. Some of them are gone. Aston Martin, they've got them. Somebody's still running Jaguar. I think Land Rover's still around. But I think Oldsmobile, Pontiac, Saturn, they're gone. Is Saab gone as well? I think so. It's hard to keep track of. I'm sorry?
Somebody tried to buy Saturn, but they couldn't make the deal.
Roger Penske, yes. But think about that. That was the key to success. And this was a good, just like with the associations, this was a good model. Having all these different brand names was a good model 25 and 30 years ago. It's not a competitive model today. It doesn't fit today's reality. Finally, we have got to embrace technology. It sounds strange saying it, but we've been too defensive. We're getting better at it. But in general, we've been a little defensive about moving into the technology space. I don't know how many conversations I listened to where a board member would say, we can't change to an electronically delivered newsletter. We can't do that. We've got members out in North Dakota that still don't have fax machines. I'm sensitive to trying to respond to the preferences of your members. But the problem was, when we let the lowest common denominator drive it, we lost the high adopters. And so, okay, I understand the guy in North Dakota not having the fax machine, but the people who are using the technology are looking at the association going, what's the matter with those guys? Why aren't they delivering this electronically? Why can't I register online? Why can't I get that digitally instead of, why are they still printing it? And as I said, this is going faster than anybody thought it was. I can't keep up with it. I don't get Facebook. I'm on my 4th shot at Facebook. I finally gave up. I went to my niece and nephew. I said, would you help your Uncle Harrison? I still don't get this thing. But anyway, it's just, if you look at how much we're delivering with technology today, what percent of your deliverables are you delivering through your website, electronic publications, online education? What percent is it today? Guess. Somebody give me a number. Is it that high? I can tell you, people say 10 years ago, maybe it was 10 or 20%. Okay, you had a website, probably electronic newsletter. Now the webinars are starting to get some traction, the electronic networking, et cetera, et cetera. I think some people say it's getting around the 50%, and I think it's just going to continue to go that way. And this is the way people are going to expect to get their value from the association. And so that means we've got to make some major shifts in our budgeting, because I started to look at what they refer to as a technology spend. What percent of the total revenues are we reallocating to technology? And for the typical association, it's about 4.1% of the total budget. Now remember, we just said 50% of our deliverables are going to technology. We're spending 4.1%. We spend more on meals at events. The average association spends more on meals and events than they do on their technology. I'm not against meals at events, don't get me wrong. Is there a reception tonight? I'll be there. I want to get my 4.2%. But anyway, we're just really going to have to look at that technology spend. And I'm not so sure how much it's hardware and software and things like that, or how much it's just people that help us manage, keep ourselves up to speed, continue to update it. Because you got 3 problems here. Number one, it's not a strength. When you think of the strength of an association when it comes to its technology, it really is, it's print and face-to-face. That's what we're good at. So we're kind of out of our depth in terms of it being a strength to build on. Number 2, you know this, it's just moving so fast that how can you keep pace with it? And the third is that we're going to have to take risks that associations traditionally don't like to take. We're going to have to fail. And associations typically don't like to make mistakes. And so I think we're just going to have to understand we're not building from strength. This is moving fast and we're generally slow. And there's going to be a failure rate that we got to get used to and be willing to take the risk. Otherwise, the gap that we've got is going to continue to get broader. So how do we find the resources? How do we fund it? We're going to have to take it away from other areas so that we can play in this space. I can tell you this. You want a shortcut to irrelevance? Keep getting behind in technology. It's a shortcut. You can get to irrelevance faster if you ignore this. There's not any question in my mind. Here are a couple of just a quick points, and then I'll open it up for some questions before we break. But these are high-level points, but don't underestimate the power of a good question. We call them keystone questions, and NSPE is built on this because Dan's kind of taken the point and started asking questions. What do the questions do? They get the dialogue going. Somebody says, you know, do you think that we need a 36-member board of directors? And so it starts the conversation. So that's a good question. I've been thinking about the same thing. I'm not so sure we do. But good questions lead to dialogue, and dialogue basically can lead to change. Don't underestimate the power of asking good questions. 2, data. You have to have data to back up your points. Because of the political and interpersonal relationships and the tradition and culture and associations, if you try to affect change and don't have numbers to back you up, it's likely that you're going to lose that argument versus win it. It wasn't until that association, it's funny, I'm getting more clients are requiring me to sign a non-disclosure agreement since I wrote this book. I'm afraid they're going to show up in number 2. But anyway, this association had to be named. It wasn't, you know, they knew their governance was cumbersome, they knew it was all the rest. But when they saw the number of $1.6 million that was absorbing, all of a sudden they said, that's ridiculous. We can't support that. That's not a good use of our members' dollars. We're not getting anywhere near $1.6 million worth of value out of it. So all of a sudden the data is what made the difference in that discussion. I know a lot of you have chapters. I'm not anti-chapter, but there was an organization that decided they were going to eliminate their chapters. They had a different model. And so it was very chapter-based, and so they had a meeting, a room like this, and it's another data story where the president-elect proposed that they go through a reorganization, eliminate the chapters, and come up with this alternative local delivery system that they thought was better. Past presidents stood up, and I don't know if you noticed, past presidents stand up and he raises his hand and he says, the chapter is the lifeblood of our association. He sat down, there was a hush, and I tell you what, if that had ended there, the chapters would still be there today because nobody would have taken that on. You know, as past president, lifeblood, you know, emotional appeal. But then the president-elect said, let me tell you about the lifeblood of our association. Last year, our 17 chapters attracted only 11% of our members. So 89% of our members did not attend a chapter meeting last year. That is down from 18% 2 years ago and 25% 4 years ago. So this is a declining percentage our members are using. Number 2, we've got openings on all 17 boards of the chapters. In 15 out of the 17, we're recycling past presidents and officers because we can't get anybody to serve. The average age of the 11% that are attending our chapters is 73. And we are, well, I'm not making that one up. And we are spending about $750,000 of dues money that go to rebates of these chapters, which are serving, which is about, 27% of our budget, which is serving only 11% of our members and a declining percent of our members. I can tell you today the chapters were discontinued. They instituted a new model. The organization is doing extremely well. I can tell you that similar organizations continue with their chapter organization. It's not. My point's not on chapters. My point is on the data. When the facts showed up, the conversation changed. It wasn't the lifeblood of the association. Here are the facts, folks. So use data. The matrices are, I think, an important tool in the book because I think they give you an opportunity to look at a snapshot of your member markets, of your programs and services, of your technology options to try to help you sort out some complicated things. Because of the competitive environment, in the next book is going to be a competitive analysis. I want to list all our competitors, and I want to do analysis. What markets do they serve? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their strategies, so that we get a snapshot? Because we need to have a better understanding. We need a better understanding of our member market. We need better understanding. These matrices give you an opportunity to kind of map them out and take a look at them at one time. And finally, the thing about either staff or volunteers in associations, the one thing, they come from all different walks of life, all different temperaments, all different types of personalities. But one thing about probably everybody in this room is that they possess some interpersonal and political skills that they use to help govern and direct the organization. And so my appeal to you, as it is to others in your position, is instead of using that political interpersonal skill that you have to maintain the status quo, it's to leverage it in bringing about the changes that you believe will bring your organizations to relevance in what is a challenging environment. You know, I can't stand here and tell you that your association, NSPE, or the state organizations, they're not going to go away. They'll still be here 10, 15, 20 years from now. Just the way Rotary and the Knights of Columbus and the Kiwanis and the JCs, they're all still here. But they've lost their vitality. They've lost their energy. They've lost their influence. They're still meeting, but they're a shadow of what they were. And my concern is that many associations can be on this same path of losing their energy and their vitality and their relevance. So on that uplifting note, questions, comments, violent disagreements. We got time for a few. Yeah. I got a couple of chapters in my briefcase if you want to take it. It's going to come out in March of next year. Yeah.
This is a stupid question, but I'll ask it anyway, because maybe that's where I come from. How do you determine relevancy? What is relevancy?
Well, another confession. The book was going to be called 5 Radical Changes. And as a couple of you know, I'm a gin drinker. And about 3 Bombay gins, I said, you know, these clients, they're in a race for relevance. And I said, give me a napkin. I got to write that down. Okay, so that's where. So I really didn't give a whole lot of thought to the term. It just kind of popped out of my mouth. But I think it's relevance. I would equate it almost to value. All right, and taking value at its most fundamental definition of something that someone's willing to pay money or time for. It's worth your money or your time. And I think that's the test. I mean, that's the value test, and I think that's the relevance test. Is this something that people are willing to commit time or money to, or both? And things that people aren't willing to commit time or money to, both scarce commodities, are not relevant. Anything else? Comments? Yep.
I noticed that, I don't know exactly a lot of one of the phrases, but you spend a lot of time talking about changing things, but not much time talking about how you communicate change.
And I really thought about it because it's critical. If you're going to bring people along, you've got to make a case. You have to make a strong case. And I can tell you this, that in my work, when you're making these organizational changes, again, you get your basic communication problems. Trying to get a message out there is difficult to begin with, and now all of a sudden you're starting to tamper with the organization, and a lot of misinformation and rumors get into the whole deal. But just a quick tip on it is that one of the best formats is Q&A when you're doing this. Why are you changing it? Is this going to mean I'm not going to be represented? Does this mean that we don't have this? Why are you doing that? So you can anticipate, here's the pushback points in the membership that they might have. And usually, when you say the membership, it's usually like a 10% of the membership that are asking these questions. That you can directly confront some of their questions or challenges or misinformation I've heard that so. No, that's not true. What is really going to happen is this. Well, if I, you know what I'm saying? So that format is a good format. But I really, why I haven't spent more time on the communication side of it, I don't know. I'll work on it. That's number 3. Actually, I didn't think much of this change was really going to take place anyway, so what's the point in talking about communicating? No.
Thanks.
Hey, it's happening. I mean, it is the most gratifying thing is that, again, I got non-disclosure, but there's a major professional society shut down a 400 state, not to shut it down, a House of Delegates, a 625-member House of Delegates, voted to shut itself down. That's radical change. That just happened a month ago. They decided that just wasn't the right way to govern the organization in today's environment. Yes, sir. Uh-oh. Oh, no.
That says, broad-based professional society can no longer serve all engineers. Now, were you talking about the 20 years?
Did I say that in there, really?
Mary wrote that.
Yeah, that was Mary's part. Thank you. Who? George. So would I stand behind that? Yeah, I think it'd be very challenging to. I think it's challenging for any provider. I don't care whether you're a not-for-profit or a for-profit or whatever, to try to be everything to everybody. And I think successful organizations are very focused on a very well-defined marketplace they want to serve. You know, part of this is personal experience. You know, people say, why are you such a nut about focus? I said, because for 27 years, it's worked really well for me. I don't do work for companies. I don't go out of my niche. If you're not a trade association or professional society, I'm not going there. And it works pretty well. It takes discipline. Sometimes you have to walk away from things. Sometimes I cheat a little bit, but not often. But I really believe that because of the complexity of the environment, the level of competition, the diversity it needs, that you've got to decide who is it, and let's just focus on that niche. And I can tell you what, once we capture that entire market and we own it, then we can go off into the wild blue yonder and try to serve other segments. Okay.
You said just that once we capture that entire market, we
Are
know we're going to get to 100, okay?
an acceptable part of that market.
What is a good percentage? You know, if we define our market as people that are licensed engineers that work for consulting firms, what percentage of that would we be good if we got it?
I can't really answer it, but I can tell you I could do this. I could measure it from a base point and say, here's where we were in 2012, and here's where we are. Which way are we going? Are we gaining share or are we losing share? I think one of the biggest measures of relevance is market share. I mean, what percent of our target market finds value in our organization? And the higher it is, the better off you are. There's some with extremely high ones. There's some with very, very low. I think the measure you'd have to make is where are we now and where do we want to be? Last question.
You've laid out a pretty good roadmap, one which I think is well able to do. But at the end of the day, that's a kind of a constant process. I mean, as associations, we're always in a state of flux. So even if we go through this process, from this process, like this day going forward, it's something that we have to continually self-evaluate, make sure that because of the changes in technology, the changes in society, we can't afford to be locked into.
Changes in the marketplace, the changes in the member profile and characteristics. One of the chapters in the next book is on the whole strategy of concentration. And Peter Drucker has a point that he made years ago. He talks about the concentration decision. He says every organization's got to make a concentration decision. Where are we going to concentrate our efforts? And he said it's more. He says it's more important for a small company or a small organization because their resource base is less, and so the imperative for them to concentrate is even higher. But he says that even once you make that, to really reinforce what you're saying, once you make that, you have to constantly revisit it. What's happened in the marketplace? What happened to our competition? Well, how is technology changing? Is that still the right concentration decision? So you have to revisit it. I don't think it's a one-time decision. Absolutely. All right, listen, we're going to take a break. We'll give you 15, 10. 10-minute break, so we'll reconvene at 20 minutes after 3. Thank you very much.